Primatech peeps, welcome back to the Primatech Files, a Southgate Media Group podcast dedicated to all things Heroes Prime and Heroes Reborn related things. I am Lilith, and joining me as always is Ricky.
Hello, it's me.
And we have a special guest.
We're doing another mini crossover event, and this time it's with one of the guys from 10th Wonders, so I guess we'll call this the PrimatechWonders. Anyway, say hello, Graham.
Hey guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for inviting me on. This is awesome. We've been, I guess, talking about this for a while.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a shame to do this at the end, like it's all over now. But I guess we could talk retrospectively and reflectively on what we just saw in the Heroes universe.
The new Heroes universe.
The new Heroes universe. Yeah.
Let's just go back to the beginning with you. So you guys did 10th Wonders for like pretty much. Well, you did everything, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, so if we're going all the way back to the beginning, I was a college student in Mississippi, along with 3 other bored college students in Mississippi, and we were kind of new to this podcasting thing, and the show Smallville was out. And my buddy Derek and Tucker started a show called Starkville's House of L, and ended up like kind of testing the podcasting waters with that, and kind of getting a cool, loyal group of listeners. And we started searching around for another show that we could do another podcast about because we really liked it. And this was, I mean, perfect timing. We heard about this show, Heroes, coming on NBC. And not only that, it's a network show, not a cable show. So the potential of it getting really, really huge was there. And also it was very heavily rooted in comic books, which we were all comic book fans. And it was just an exciting thing. So when the show premiered, we just knew right off the bat, like, this is the show that we're going to do a podcast about. And it started off with myself and Tucker Colburn, and we just did a pilot episode, which is the first episode of our 10th Wonder podcast. And I cringe when I listen to it. It's just like, a bunch of 22-year-old dudes just sitting around chatting about heroes. And I had a very thick Southern accent because I was still living in Mississippi at the time. We put that out there, and sure enough, it started getting listeners, and our website started getting visits, and we just kept it going. And every week we put out a new episode, and people seemed to enjoy our opinions, even though we were kind of like, we definitely had the imposter syndrome. We were just like, why do people care what we think about this show? It's really weird. But we kind of structured our show around just talking about our reactions to every week as it went by. And even when the show was off the air, like it had a few hiatuses here and there, we would still do episodes and talk about the news and things like that. And it just ended up kind of becoming this force in all of our lives. And we look back on it fondly now, because it was just 4 straight years of just this crazy experience. And it got so, at one point we got invited to the set in Hollywood, and nice. I got to sit and watch a few scenes of season 2 get shot and hang out with like Greg Beeman, and met Tim Kring. And I was just like, the entire time I was like, I can't believe this is all because we just decided to press record on GarageBand and record ourselves talking, like we would anyway, but just putting it out there. And that's just kind of a testament to the medium, I guess.
Yeah. Did you guys cover everything, or just the show?
We covered the show primarily. And when we could, we would dive into like the graphic novels and things like that. And Heroes has always been this multi-platform experience.
Hey.
And they definitely set out, especially in the first few seasons, to try to make it this multifaceted, multi-layered multimedia experience. I think they called it trans-platform or something like that. There's a better name for it now, but back then they didn't have a name for it. And yeah, we covered the graphic novels as much as we could, especially because we had formed kind of like friendships with the writers of those graphic novels kind of over the years. So we wanted to cover their stuff on our show. But then as it started getting into, I guess, Saving Charlie was the first big novel. We didn't actually end up covering that. And we kind of drew the line of like, we're going to cover everything that the show, that's on the show and is directly connected to the show. But we didn't end up covering stuff like that other people picked up and ran with, like Saving Charlie. Mm-hmm. And I think like in this particular run of Heroes, there was a bunch of ebooks and some video games and stuff like that we didn't necessarily cover directly. That, I'm sure are great, and everybody and a lot of folks have have told us as much, that they really enjoy that stuff. But we find ourselves talking for hours about like 3 seconds of footage. Like there's just no way we could find time to cover everything, because it's gotten so broad now.
Well, you and Lilith share a common thread. You both first started out your podcasting career on talking about Smallville.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, and our friends that did Starkville's House of L ended up going all the way with it. Like they covered it, I guess, from like season 3 or 4 to whenever it ended, season 9. And yeah, that for a while we had like, I think at our peak we had like 4 podcasts going at once.
Oh.
And
Wow.
Heroes was just one of them. And then it all kind of stopped at the same time. And we had a good 4 years of just kind of sitting around and actually doing our, being adults with responsibilities and jobs and families. And then all of a sudden during the Winter Olympics, we saw an ad for Heroes Reborn. And we tell this story in the very first episode of our Heroes Reborn podcast. But like, we all sort of did this thing where we texted each other. I saw it air while I was watching the Winter Olympics. And then Derek texted us and said, check Twitter. And we looked, and all of our Twitter feeds were just like, oh my God, Heroes is coming back. This is real. Like, and everyone is freaking out, and no one knew anything. Like, they kept it such a complete secret. Even people in NBC had no idea it was coming back. And like the only people that knew it was coming back was like Tim Kring and the guy who helped him cut that promo. and then sure enough, like 8 months later, we started seeing casting announcements, and like it started to feel more real, and we knew we had to get the podcast back off the ground, which was harder than it would have seemed because we let the domain expire. We thought it was never going to come back. So yeah, when we started our new podcast, we had 100 episodes or so of our old podcast that just went away.
Oh, man.
We still have them all, but we don't have a feed anymore for those. We actually, a very awesome fan went and created a new feed with all of our old episodes that people can subscribe to, which I thought was an awesome thing for them to do. So we're like working on getting our old feed and our new feed kind of coexisting for folks that want to go back and listen to the stuff that we had to say 5 or 6 years ago about the old series.
Are you gonna keep your domain this time, just on the off chance?
On the off chance, I think I'll set it to renew every 3 years or something like that, and maybe, and after 6 years or so, maybe we'll give it up. But it was so weird. We let our domain expire, and a month later, that teaser came out.
Oh no!
A month later, yikes.
Yeah, and not only that, what happens when a semi barely popular domain expires? Somebody buys it and puts it on auction. So I had to bid on my own domain name to get it back. I think it was like $500.
Oh.
And so I bid on it, and it looked like I was going to win. And then I'm like, wait a second, isn't there like a grace period or something? So I called my domain registrar and I said, like, okay, this expired less than 30 days ago. Is there a grace period? Can I get it back? And they're like, oh, absolutely. Here we go. And so I got the domain back, but my bid was still outstanding. So I technically still own the domain, but I was going to have to owe this guy money for it. Anyway, that's a long story and it's boring, but I ended up not having to pay that guy. So and we got our domain back.
We just learned, don't let it expire, Ricky. We have to do an episode every month for the rest of our lives now.
Don't let your domain expire. iTunes will delete your feed, and bad things happen with domain auctions. So that's keep that in mind.
As long as they still got the comics, I think we're all good.
Yeah,
monthly, just a little 5-minute. Yeah, this was really good, and Farah was really good.
I don't know if I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the last thing. So we haven't actually recorded our final episode yet. And I feel really bad about it. Like I texted the guys yesterday. And I'm like, hey guys, I know we don't want this to end, but we kind of have to do this eventually. And they're all saying like, we're gonna, because I'll be in New York for a week. Derek's in a play, and Joe is busy. So like we actually don't know when we're gonna record. Hopefully soon. I don't want to keep anybody waiting any longer. Plus, I don't know if we want it to be fresh in our minds, of course. But I know what we're going to talk about on that show, and it's kind of like Tim Kring's parting thoughts, kind of refuting that all the news about it being quote unquote canceled, which I kind of feel like the news stuff was accurate. The show is not being renewed, but it felt like they're trying to walk back the news reports a bit. and say like we never technically were canceled. We never technically said we were going to do another season. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
Don't you think if NBC said we want another one of these, you would say yes? You would agree to that. It wouldn't be like, nope, we were only going to do one. So sorry,
And also, if you weren't thinking about doing another season, would you have tacked on that little bit at the end? Which
Yeah,
I'm still a bit bitter about that. No matter how many,
It's gonna be a book or a graphic novel, Ricky. Let it go.
Who's the dad?
Exactly.
Who is their father?
Who do you think's the daddy?
I have a joke response and an actual response.
Go on.
I don't know. I actually don't have either of those. my knee jerk joke was going to be Siler, but that doesn't make sense and would make a lot of people angry. So I'm not going to say that. And I don't know. I mean, honestly, it could be anyone, and and I feel like that's a cop out answer, and it is. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like this particular run and how they structured the story and how they approached everything, like everything is off the table or everything's on the table. It could be anyone.
They didn't even get rid of like most of the original characters. Like you've still got technically you can still have Hero turn up in the next season, or Parkman, or even to an extent Mahinda. But I really like the idea of the dad being someone we don't know, because it gives us a chance to kind of bring someone new into the Heroes universe and kind of just get to know them. Like the way I've been equating it to is like How I Met Your Mother, and you didn't know the mother for like 8 seasons.
Yeah.
And
dude, I'm still bitter. Why you gotta bring this up, Ricky?
Oh man, but
it's a spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it. I'm just kidding.
But like at the end of it, you find out. So like my idea, if Tim's listening, is the next season is just the 5 years in between, and just get to know the father in those 5 years, so you can see the rise of the Evo.
And at the end, it's a bait and switch.
It was all a dream.
And then at the end, he turns into Sylar. Everyone's like,
he was shape-shifting the whole time. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I feel like one of my big things that I always stick to is when we first heard the show was coming back, I had two vastly different opinions. I said, wouldn't it be great if they just rebooted the entire thing and we got season 1 again with completely new characters, like absolutely no strings attached to the old set of characters. And as it became more and more clear that we weren't going to get that, I started to kind of open my mind up to be like, okay, well, can they do it attached to the old story, but still in a cool way? And as this series progressed, I started to agree. Yeah, they're pulling it off. There's some really cool stuff happening, and they're doing the right things to not kind of get bogged down by the old baggage from what people, I guess, some people had some issues with certain things in the old series, and it turned people off on the show. Not everyone had those issues, but it seemed like they were staying clear of the trickier things. And then Hero showed up, and then time travel happened again, and then it felt like, oh, okay, this is a familiar feeling, and we sort of, from that point forward, it got a little bit bogged down. I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy it. There were parts of it that I vastly enjoyed, and that finale I enjoyed a lot.
I think that's the finale we've been waiting for.
Yeah, and like we haven't done our podcast about it, but this is a spoiler, at least if you're listening to our show. Like, I really liked that finale. And I think Joe did too. I think Derek might have hated it. But and that's what's great about having 3 hosts, is we'd never agree on anything. So we cover all of our bases.
How do you rate the finale in terms of compared to the rest of them?
I'd say it was one of the stronger episodes, if not the strongest. Of the entire thing. Now, I'm sure there are people screaming at me through their phones and iPods and stuff, but I don't know. I felt like it had the right amount of fan service, and it tied up things that needed to get tied up. Now, you could take issue with the motivations behind everything because they were long and meandering, and it's a lot of characters' motivations were just kind of like for their own sake, and so we took issue with a lot of that, and we've discussed it at length in our previous podcast. But I don't know. It felt like the ending that it needed, and that the ending was one of the strongest pieces, and that they spent a lot of time focused on making that great.
Yeah. They had everything in that ending. They had like I think the monologue at the end was perfect, and I think it
Oh
would have
my
been
gosh, Quentin's
a great way just to end it. But no,
like that feeling I got while Quentin was doing his talk about, the Evos just being regular people doing what's right and stuff. Like I got chills. That was like, that's the kind of charged writing that the original show would have quite often. And I felt like dragged right back into 2008 or 9 and like just felt all of that over again. It was a really nostalgic and an awesome feeling, and I was almost like, no, don't end here, this is too good, like, oh, and then it faded to black. But yeah, do you think Angela, to go back to the father thing, do you think Angela knows?
She always knows.
She always knows.
It felt to me like she knew who the father was.
But then I don't know whether she's like telling the truth about, whether he's like, because it seems like he's a bad guy, but to me it's like, well, he could be a good guy. She's just trying to keep them away. So it could be just like that kind of Angela manipulation all over again, which I'm not opposed to. And
right.
Also, like, who's to say that the character at the end is the father and not just some kind of minion who works for his father? Because they played a lot with the kind of iconography of it all. So you had the strawberry milkshake, which is like very much Samuel Sullivan from season 4, which obviously isn't the father. He had that kind of brown trench coat from season 1 of Peter Petrelli, and it's in like the ice cream shop, which is like the Burnt Toast Diner. The first time we kind of see Sila properly. So they kind of are mixing around with everything. So it's a lot for people to kind of talk about. I'm just a bit tired of hearing it Sila because I don't think it would be. But yeah,
I love
it's just my knee-jerk
because
reaction.
it's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Is like for it to be Sila, it's just a ridiculous thing, and it's
that
kind
would
of
be
like,
a poop on the fans.
I liked, so my first thing, I had the exact same train of thought. Like when I saw were they tarot cards?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh, Samuel. And
Yeah.
like, no, that's too, like, they would never, like, that character got such a negative response from the fans that I doubt they would ever bring him back. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it could be anybody.
Also, I think something that's that needs to be brought up is the two cards. Like one of them says like twins, and the other one says destroyer, like in Italian, and that could mean like two things. Like it could mean that the person who's coming for them, or the father, is coming to destroy the twins, or it could be twins, comma destroyers, and it could be the twins. The twins have saved the world with this magic force field. Who's to say that they won't be able to split the world in half like we were expecting in season 3? Like they could bring it all the way back there, because they brought 5 years forward here with Parkman, and we kind of, I don't know, that's just me spitballing. So yeah,
I like that though. Yeah.
I like the ideas of the twins kind of turning evil, because they've already gone there with the Star Wars references all the way through. Why not?
This entire miniseries had such a Star Wars undercurrents, and we joked there was actually a promo at one point that said "A New Hope" on screen.
There was also that summer 2015, which I think would have worked out a lot better for us, but we wouldn't have got that 2-month break or whatnot. But yeah.
Who was your favorite character from the Reborn cast? None of the old members.
So I would say Quentin was my favorite, and for a lot of reasons. I didn't like him at first when he started turning evil, but I knew that we were gonna get that flipped back around at some point, because that was sort of like the way for them to show like, oh, going back in time has its consequences. Now look, Quentin is evil. You really liked this guy, and so it made us hate what happened, and then when he flipped back to good again, it kind of made it made that more effective, I guess, because we hated the fact that had happened to him. I liked Quentin from the second that Dark Matters
Definitely,
started.
yeah.
And I like Henry Zebrowski as an actor very much. And I knew from the moment they announced him as being a part of the cast that like it's going to be hard for me not to just really zone in and really like this character. And I did. I thought that Quentin grounded the show in humor and light and the lightheartedness that Hero gave us in the original series,
in a completely different way as well.
Yeah, in a completely different style of humor. Yeah, because I think that Hero is more slapsticky and very much like Hero's goofy because he doesn't understand things that are happening and stuff like that. But Henry was just kind of witty and smart, and he was able to kind of bring the show down a couple of notches off of like taking itself too seriously, which I think is definitely something that if the show took itself way too seriously, then it would make a lot of people kind of just tune out, I think.
Do you think that he could replace? He has to kind of replace HRG in that kind of normal human who's looking after kind of Evo's kind of deal.
It's hard for me to say if they were to greenlight a second season of Heroes Reborn, where they would go with Quentin from this point. And I think that he is definitely able, as a character, he's definitely able to do that, because that monologue at the end of saying kind of what was coming to his mind about, and you have to keep in mind, like, he just had to kill his own sister.
Yeah.
And he's seen what happens when things get out of control, and he clearly understands why, you don't interfere with this, and you just need to leave these people alone, and they're not necessarily bad. Of course, anyone has the potential to be bad. There are regular people that are terrible, so it's not just like, oh, all Evos are bad. And I think that he's clearly in the right mental space to pick up where HRG left off. And he's battle hardened a bit too. Like you always got the sense that Noah was battle hardened through experience. And, we got glimpses of that experience through episodes like Company Man and the graphic novels and things like that. And that, like, Noah is as careful as he is because he knows the consequences. And I think that Quentin is definitely that person now, and he could pick up where Noah left off.
Your favorite character from the new show, Lilith?
Katana Girl, not to be confused with Miko with the no chin in her face. I really enjoyed Katana Girl and Ren, and that while I didn't really necessarily enjoy Ever Now, I did like it for the fact that it was something new, fresh, fun, and different, and it gave me this character, and it gave Tim a chance to fulfill one of his lifelong dreams for Heroes. So I don't know, like, I feel like it was a Deus Ex Machina at times, especially for the Tommy Nathan thing. But yeah, Katana Girl is my jam. Action, she's a female, and plus Kiki Suzanne can do her own stunts, so like, just love.
She was amazing. Kiki was fantastic, and she was actually one of my favorite actresses to follow on Twitter during the show. She would tweet out amazing pictures of them all just having fun on the set. And we got like kind of on the episode where we thought that she died when she let Hero out. She, like, that night tweeted a picture of herself in the desert, and we were like, nope, she's not gone. And so we actually picked up a few spoilers from that Twitter account. But yeah, the entire cast, I feel like if I had to draw a comparison between the old cast and the new cast, is that the new cast definitely feels like they had that same spirit of camaraderie and friendship definitely that the old cast did. And that was awesome to see. It's from the point of like Comic-Con on, I was like, yes, I'm so excited because they all seem to like each other. And having an ensemble cast that's that large, the odds of that happening are slim. But at least they make it look like they're all friends. They're having this experience together, and it had me more excited for the show after Comic-Con, watching those panels.
I'm probably going to go with Quentin as well, because again, like you said, just meeting him from Dark Matters, he was an awesome little character. And I think when he first got cast, like, I was a bit wary because obviously A to Z or Z.
I loved his character in A to Z. I was one of the few people that actually liked A to Z.
I didn't mind it.
I watched like, I guess they only had 3 episodes, right, before it got canned. But I watched what was out there, and I was like, who is this guy? He's hilarious. Every scene he's in, and then I saw that he got announced to be on Heroes, and I was like, oh man, I'm so excited.
Yeah, I think when I first saw him, I was like, oh, he's the comic relief. He probably won't have powers, and he'll probably die pretty early on. And I was like, I can deal with that. If Heroes are going to actually kill people off, that's fine. As soon as I saw Dark Matters and I saw it was basically his and Phoebe's and Aislin's relationship. It was their chemistry was great, and I could feel where he was coming from the whole time when he was trying to save his sister. Like, he's just looking at her like, that's not my sister, but no matter how many times I try and see it. And like when he killed her, a part of me died as well because I was like, oh, the Frady Cats, I love them so much. Why can't they stay together? Why can't she be redeemed? Sure, she's killed a lot of people. Sure, she's killed a lot of people, but still.
But like that was she was under the influence of like one of the worst people ever, and so that's eventually like if he's ever going to come to terms with what he had to do, like that's it. Like that's not my sister. She became someone else. I feel like if you didn't watch Dark Matters,
yeah, it wouldn't have made any sense.
Didn't understand their relationship as well as you could have, and I think there's a lot of people that watched Heroes Reborn that didn't see Dark Matters. I think most Heroes fans of the old show did see Dark Matters because it was one of the first pieces of new content that we could watch and talk about.
It was the best as well, wasn't it?
It was really well done. The guys at Retrofit Films, like I'm sure they had scraps of a budget to work with, but somehow pulled out an amazing just kind of kicking off point for the show, and it helped us to understand those two characters so extremely well, and it made us feel a lot more for Phoebe too.
Yeah, definitely.
Because Phoebe before Phoebe was the Shadow Phoebe was a pretty normal, relatable person, and then what she's turned into is like this automaton that just is absolutely terrible.
Definitely, yeah.
And that helped me as a viewer not immediately like shirk that off. And I'm sure a lot of people that didn't see Dark Matters were like, she's evil, you know, like they didn't really get kind of where that was coming from.
I think it's funny the way that people talk about how there were just too many characters in the season, but if you look at the amount of number in the main cast in the original season 1 and this season 1, there's a lot
there were
more.
Way more.
Yeah. Sure, they killed off some of them because they were, you know, women. No, sorry, Simone. But, you know, what can you do? I don't know. It's just I think people like to pick on it just because season 1 was the best. Apparently, I'm still a bit bitter about season 1. So yeah,
of the original show.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, are we talking about main characters now or the?
No, yeah. We can talk about. Let's talk about main characters and let's just talk about like how did you feel about how do you feel that they used most of the new cast like. Obviously, you think Quentin was the best, but like, who do you think was the MVP of people with powers, and who could you have kind of done without?
Oh man, that is tough. Main characters who I thought were the best, and it's tough to know what a main character is in this show, right?
Exactly.
Because the show is much like the old series. The show was told in almost vignettes. You would get 30 seconds to a minute of one scene in this one location with this one set of characters. And then it would jump to a completely different location with a completely different set of characters and tell a different. And so at any given moment, you would have 4 storylines going at the same time being told in parallel. And so I had a tough time. I'm having a tough time picking out what my favorite overall was of the new main cast. I would have said Luke at one point, but I feel like there was a point where Luke won me over, and then there was a point where I knew what they were going to do with him, and it was just so obvious he was going to sacrifice himself for some greater good. I mean, and right up until that moment in the finale where he stopped the first solar flare, I was like, well, we all knew this was going to happen. Like that moment fell so flat for me because they had been building it up for like 8 episodes.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh man. So if it's not Luke, it would have to be, I felt like Tommy was really strong.
He got strong as he got along.
He got stronger as he went along. Carlos, definitely not. Hated nearly every scene Carlos was in. And is that an unpopular opinion or is that a comment?
I think a lot of people felt that he was kind of unneeded. I like the sentiment behind the character, I like the fact that we finally got a costume superhero, no matter how close we got with a Crimson Lightning. But I also like the fact that, he was that kind of street level kind of superhero.
I liked that. And they put out a couple of graphic novels and ebooks about him. I feel like they could have left him in the graphic novels and ebooks. The Carlos stuff was And you know, and when you take a step back and you're like, oh, I see what they wanted to do with this character. Like, oh, they wanted to have a costume vigilante character, like AKA Batman. And then you see the stuff with Miko and Ren. You're like, oh, they wanted to have a power that kind of allowed you to jump back and forth into the virtual world and explore that concept. And it's like on the surface, you're like, okay, that's cool. That's really cool concepts. But what they ended up doing with Carlos, I feel like it was kind of, again, for its own sake, and it didn't make a lot of sense. And the stuff with the Captain Deering character ended way too fast. And he, like, of that storyline, they started to get me interested with the Deering pair up that they were going to do and the Sunstone stuff. But that ended up being really, really weird and awkward.
I think they did a lot with some of these characters, and they kind of paid homage to the previous work. So you had like that kind of future hero with Tommy and Nathan, and you had kind of Nathan Petrelli with Captain Deering, because you know you've got that kind of self-loathing Evo who's using his powers to gain. He's not even using his powers to get. He's just using his powers to kind of gain more power in his workplace. Essentially, I think they did that with quite a lot of the characters, and I really appreciate that.
They did total nods to a lot of the old fan favorite characters. I
think it's something that they kind of had to do, because not only do you have to bring a whole load of new people into this world, you also have to kind of pay fan service to the fans who were with you from the beginning. And I think a lot of people, not that they missed it, but they were just like, we want something new. And if they didn't get, like, they got something old, but if they didn't get that old thing, they would have complained about it, much like, oh, Milo's not in it, or Zachary's not in it, or Claire's not in it. That was a big bugaboo with me, because, you know, it's not like they didn't try, or they might not have tried to get some of those people, but they did the best with what they had, and what they had came out with a really decent season, which is probably better than some of the original Heroes season. I just think that nostalgia plays a big role in Heroes, and a lot of people remember the first season. They always say, oh, the first season's the best season, but when I went back and rewatched it, I was like, oh, it didn't half bloody drag in the middle, you know? Whereas this one, I really liked Fugitives. Fugitives was like probably one of my favorite seasons, and because it was self-contained, 13 episodes essentially. I think it worked, and yeah.
I am totally agree with you there. Fugitives was really, really great. And if I'm remembering right, is Fugitives the one that got cut off by the writer strike, or was that
Generations?
Generations, okay.
Yeah.
So Fugitives had to pick up from
that was after Villains, yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, now I'm getting
there
the
we go.
Right. Like I said, we were one of the few podcasts that didn't go back and rewatch the entire series before the new one started up, because we felt like, oh well, we remember the high points, and that's all we really need to remember. Yeah, so the names and order of the volumes are escaping me a little bit, but it's like a lot of people always say that the first season of Heroes was the strongest, and I think and you definitely hit it right with the nostalgia thing. I think a lot of people are nostalgic for that first season because it was such a revelation. It was one of the first network television shows of its kind to do what it did, and now, fast forward to now, it is not like is not an original thing at all to do what Heroes did. So I think at one point you could have said, "Oh, the season 1 was the best season," but like it was good because it was this nostalgia that's pushing it forward. Like, oh, I remember like that groundbreaking show, and every season after that, it's not quite so groundbreaking anymore. And you had all kinds of other shows crop up around it that were exploring interesting ideas in the same space. So it's hard for Heroes to come back and they tried to do interesting things, but almost everything that they do, you could map to some other show that did it already. Yeah. And you couldn't really do that with the first Heroes. You had maybe Smallville that you could have said, oh, well, there's people with powers and, stuff like that. A lot of other shows kind of cropped up around that time because I'm not going to say because of the success of Heroes in the early stages.
Oh, but I just think that family, come on.
Just the world was discovering this gold mine of like comic books as jumping off points for television shows and concepts and ideas and things like that. And so now we've had almost 10 years of kind of the brightest minds in Hollywood thinking of the best things to do. And when we brought back Heroes, it was sort of like, oh, well, let's see what these guys can do again.
Let's see if they can play in the sandbox of all these kind of
Totally.
well established kind of comic book shows. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like you've got the Flash, which has been around for like 75 years. You've got all these kind of characters which have been around for so long, and then you've got this little 10-year show.
When the first season of Heroes started up, you're like, oh man, they're doing it. They're pulling this off. And it's because they had folks like Jeff Loeb involved. And they had some really titans of the comic book world involved in the production process. And it showed a lot in the early seasons of Heroes. And I think like as the show went on, those people started to kind of peel off and do other things. And it started to kind of be driven by its own sort of world and its own lore.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think like fans of the show, you're almost never going to meet a fan of Heroes that doesn't have at least something that they're a little bit nitpicky about, or that's something that they liked. And then they'll on the other hand, they'll be like, well, I didn't like this. And, I think maybe I've met a few that are just like, oh no, everything's great. This is the best show ever. But we've experienced that, whenever we tweet or talk about the show, we get mixed responses, overwhelmingly positive. We would get fans that were just so loyal to the show, and we were too. They'll be overwhelmingly positive, but then they would be like, I don't understand why this is happening or why this character did this thing, and so it got to the point where people were focusing a lot of energy on things that they didn't understand or stuff like that. And it's like, you kind of wish that wouldn't happen, but then what would we have to talk about on our podcast?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, I kind of like the nebulousness of Heroes sometimes. And when Heroes Reborn got started up, there was stuff happening that I have no idea what just happened, but here are my 5 theories about what that means.
Yeah.
And I felt like, oh man, this is great. It is great to be back.
I also think like people who would watch the show originally kind of would know that some of these weird out there things would pay off eventually, because you knew how Tim kind of tells his stories. Whereas I think a lot of the new audience were like, oh, this is taking so long. Why can't I just watch this on Netflix?
Right.
And
yeah, totally. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. How would you, like, we always ask this question, how would you do a podcast on a Netflix show?
Probably week to week. I think you can't do anything otherwise.
You would just have to, but people are going to watch that show all in order and in a weekend. How would you?
Oh, I'd watch it all in the weekend, and then what I would probably do is I would set a quote unquote live tweet for like an episode on like maybe a Saturday, and then directly afterwards record it, and then get people's feedbacks on it that way. That's how we did. We were doing weekly live tweets of the old episodes, and that's how we kind of ran it. But we did blocks of like 3 episodes. But if it's 13 episodes and that's all we're getting, I could do that week on, week out, episode a week. But how would you guys do it?
I like, your guess is as good as mine. I would think like, since everyone's going to watch all the episodes at once, then it's sort of like it's kind of up to you to come up with a format that works for you. And you get to keep your sanity.
Yeah.
And that seems like that makes the most sense. The one new episode a week and just kind of like rewatch it and put it out, and you'll just have to be slow on getting all of the episodes done when, by the time you released your episode for the last episode, people had been finished watching it for several weeks.
And I'd be one of the first people binge watching the whole thing anyway.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. It's not like I'd be like, no guys, seriously, don't watch this. Don't watch it all at once.
Don't send me spoilers.
Watch it as if it were airing on television, and just download our podcast. No, you'd have to adapt for how people are watching TV now, which is not the episodic week to week format anymore.
And it's not just that they're going to dump all the episodes on Netflix. They're going to dump all the comics, the graphic novels, all the ebooks, all the webisodes.
Treasure trove of content.
All for you for a whole weekend. Yeah.
If Heroes ever gets picked up in any sort of on demand way, which honestly, like it's a network show and always has been a network show. The folks that are making Heroes have strong ties to the network studio model. And you saw that happening in Heroes Reborn. Like it was a very much structured as if it were going to air on, a big network television show, and that informs how it's made.
I think some shows on like Netflix and maybe even like Hulu and Amazon Prime, they air weekly. Like I'm sure like over here anyway.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, so they could kind of get away with it if they did it that way, but I don't know how I think NBC are gonna hold on to that for dear life.
Yeah, I feel like it would be so hard for Netflix to pick up Heroes because NBC, for all intents and purposes, maybe owns it outright.
Yeah.
The IP for it, or maybe Tim Kring owns it. I don't know. Maybe he could sell it to Netflix. I don't know how all the business stuff went down when they renewed the show, or if it was just an extension of an old contract or something like that.
Yeah. So let's talk about something else. Let's talk about. We've done many roundtables about like all the main characters, but what I think something that we need to talk about is the kind of supporting characters and how much more intriguing a lot of those supporting characters are. People like Taylor, people like Casper, even Harris. Like I love Harris. I think he's one of the best henchmen. What do you think about like some of the more minor characters being a bit more intriguing than some of our main characters?
I think that's a good point. There were several minor characters that eclipsed our main characters in a lot of ways, especially when they were on screen. Harris, there was very few scenes that I disliked Harris in. He was good in nearly everything, and like the thing that sold me on Harris, I think, was on the second or third episode when he got his hand cut off and regenerated, and he's like, "I'd like my watch back." And then the clone's like, "Oh, of course."
It didn't make sense in the end because like he had a bomb on his back at one point and he got sliced in half, but the bomb reappeared. But I was fine with it.
We had a long drawn out discussion about why that could happen, but the watch couldn't.
Yeah.
my co-host and friend Joe was adamant that he knew exactly why they chose the, and it's like, it was his hand that grew back. It wasn't like, so it's like his hand had the watch didn't have to regenerate. And, it was like, he will draw up a map and connect strings of yarn and go full on Quentin and Isaac for you if you ask him why. But Harris was amazing. Like that, I'm a huge fan of that actor now.
Yeah,
and I had no idea who he was before Heroes Reborn, and that's probably my fault. I didn't really. I don't know. I'm sure he's in other stuff, and I'm sure he will be in other things. But that he is extremely good.
We talked to Marco Grazzini, who played the original El Vengador, and he worked with him on a previous project, which was basically a cartoon. And I think if anyone can be in a cartoon, like it's Clay Bennett. Like his voice is so silky smooth. I've made so many jokes about just like they should take Heroes into kind of audio drama and just have it be about Clay Bennett. Like we can have Erica show up. We can find out how they got together and like how he became the right-hand man. I think it would be great.
We can get the dudes from Memory Palace in on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Radiolab. Oh man, so Harris, one of my favorites. He sold the role so well. There were only a few like scenes scattered about there where I thought he was wasn't as strong, but like who cares? He was so good most of the time.
He's like the Haitian of the original series. He's in like nearly every scene in the background.
Yeah. And just his presence there was enough to be like, oh, okay. This is going on.
You got Casper.
Casper. Oh man. Casper might be my favorite.
Yeah.
Casper made me remember the feeling I had when you would see folks from the original Primatech company in the old show.
Yeah.
He was so good and so mysterious. And like I think our nickname for him was Bowtie Guy.
Yeah.
We had no idea who he was for a while because they didn't say Casper till like that 6th or 7th episode. And I think we actually learned his name through one of the video games or something like that. Somebody like came out in the dialogue there. But the question marks surrounding his character, the mysteriousness of it, and then when we slowly start to understand what his power was, what the pennies did, and like I liked all of that. Like all of that was so strong, and I was so angry when they killed him off.
I know.
Because my theory was when we knew that there was going to be that showdown happening in the ice cream shop, Sunday Bloody Sunday, which I'm still mad about how they spelled that for the episode title. But the showdown, I thought, oh man, he took Tommy's memories away, and we know he's storing the memories on these pennies. And what if at the right moment he could flip the penny back to Tommy?
Oh, man.
Tommy grabs it and then has all of his knowledge back from when he was trained by Hero. But instead he got shot in the face.
The thing that I was annoyed about was he was like Casper was literally on the verge of making Joanne forget everything. And then all of a sudden, Tommy rushes in there and tries to be the big man and just ruins everything. I will never forgive Tommy for that. And I'm saying it's Tommy, not Nathan, because that's who we got.
I know we had trouble with that too. Like, do we call him Tommy or Nathan? Like, clearly the show calls him Nathan now, but we call him Tommy because people that are watching the show may not have understood that his name changed. And that was confusing because we in our notes we would be Tommy Nathan.
Yeah.
Tommy Nathan jumps into the ice cream parlor and ruins everything.
I think also he was a hark back to season 1 in the way that he appeared. He was very much like HRG in the way that he appeared. He was just there and you didn't really know about him, anything about him. And yeah, definitely.
That's I know they were probably following the formula of the Haitian with Casper, and that worked for me. And I even liked young Casper in the next to final episode. I was just like, man, they
so many stories.
Yeah, I feel like Casper was the strongest brand new supporting character.
I also love the fact that he was Noah's partner for a bit, and it totally makes sense because like the Haitian, and then he just goes on to Casper next. He just loves people who take memories.
Right, and that's how he doesn't have powers, but he knows how to use the folks that have memory powers. And that plays into how he operates and how he was able to do what he did to keep everything under wraps. And that scene where Casper shows up to kind of bail HRG out of the cell. And he's like, remember what happened in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Like, and then you're like, oh, they worked together. Oh my gosh. Like, it was the show kind of lives and dies on its reveals. And that was a good one. That was really good.
That should have been one of the ebooks as well.
Oh man, I would have loved more history of Casper and Noah.
What did you think about Anne Clark? What did you think of Mama Tommy?
Now I'm thinking like, oh yeah, she was a supporting character. She was extremely strong. Every scene that I remember her in, especially if it was her and Tommy, she grounded that relationship in reality and made the scenes of Tommy and his mother extremely believable and heartfelt. I really liked her and I don't think that I think that's a very everyone agrees with me on that. Like, she was an extremely strong character in the show. She did a really good job. When they went back in time, did you catch that it was her that that was something that we didn't catch on the first watch through? Like they tied her hair back in a certain way, and I was like, I don't know who that is, and we're like, oh my gosh, it's Tommy's mom. And then that's when it started to dawn on us that like, oh, these kids might have been swapped and taken back in time and stuff, and like. Some people can be like, oh, I don't like how the show did time travel this time around. I'm like, well, that was a pretty original idea.
Yeah.
Like, take these kids back in time, let them grow up, and
and it was a good reveal as well. It's like it's not just like the fact that Claire had kids; it's the fact that the kids, we've known them since the beginning of the show.
That was really good.
Also, something is the fact that if you think about it, when Heroes was starting, like when it started originally, those like Tommy is in Odessa the whole time. Like just living with Hero whilst there's another hero, present hero and future hero running about. It just blows my mind like how it all works out with the time travel thing.
A lot of people and the show seemed to very confidently move through those murky waters. There was that really quick line from Angela of like, we can never run into our future or former selves. And I was like, and they kind of with that line tied up what everyone was concerned about. And I remember being like, wow, they know that by wading into these very, very dangerous piranha-infested waters with this time travel concept, that they know the fire that they're playing with. And it was sort of interesting. You could disagree with how certain things came about, like the butterfly effects, and the show did kind of play fast and loose with time travel. And what was the one thing we were hung up on? We were so hung up on something that happened.
Was it about the Haitian being alive again?
I don't quite remember it. I'm having trouble bringing it back up. But I was so upset about one particular time travel thing, and maybe I'm so sad because I'm going to remember it as soon as we're done recording. I don't know, but it's something like that where like the show kind of came up with its own rules in a few of the spots.
Yeah. But I think that's fine as long as you come up with your own rules and you fully explain them.
Yeah, as soon as
I've got no problem.
with actual context, then that's fine.
There's only one other kind of supporting character because I think a lot of the supporting characters were the ones who had lines anyway. Like they were really good. What did you think of Farah?
I felt like she could have been stronger if her character did not depend so much on Carlos at the end. I did not like. I liked Farah before we learned that she had a relationship with Carlos.
I'm the other way around.
Really? Well, I feel like I grew to like it more because their relationship actually ended up feeling pretty genuine.
Actually, I got that wrong. I liked Carlos a lot more when I figured out he was with Farah. Sorry.
I feel like when Farah was protecting Melina, I loved the fact that she was like this Sherpa for Melina that was guiding her to her destiny. And like, oh, this is cool. I kind of like this concept. I'm on board. And then we find out that it gets a little bit more clouded with the fact that she had this relationship with Carlos and they served in the military together. And there's a lot of stuff that happens between them. And, the fact that what she did for Carlos explains why Carlos was, suffering from imposter syndrome and all of that stuff and just kind of having trouble dealing with him. That's why he was dark and brooding. And so it explains why we didn't like Carlos to begin with. But I felt like she could have been a stronger character were it not for her connection to Carlos. If they had kind of just explored her destiny of like protecting Melina and because, for much of the latter part of the show, she's not protecting Melina.
Yeah.
She's not even around her. So
she's been the damsel in distress.
She does ultimately pay that back by like diving in front of the bullet for her. But when it happened, I'm like, oh, there she goes, taking another bullet for Melina.
But you knew if anyone was going to survive, it was going to be Farah because, she's already been shot a couple of times and she survived Afghanistan.
And I guess that's why that particular scene, I was just like, well, okay, that happened. And I was hoping that she would come out to do something really, really, her character would do something extremely strong that was like active and not passive, like, I guess I don't know. Maybe I'm just seeing it a different way, but she did live up to her what she told Angela she was going to do. She protected Melina,
and she's got a comic book series which I'm really looking forward to reading. It's going to be all about her origin story. So, and apparently Titan are up for like more kind of stories. They just have to kind of figure out. Cool. So so hopefully sooner or later we'll get the Harris comic book, but we can hope and wait.
I'll read that one.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
So, I think we've taken up more than enough of your time. So
I got all the time in the world for Heroes. I could do this for 3 or 4 more hours.
I could talk about it as well, but we'll save it for another time. Hopefully, let's just finish off with. I've got kind of 2 questions. The first one is, what is like, including Heroes Reborn? Do you have like a favorite order of the volumes? Them being, what was the Genesis, Generations, Fugitives, Villains, and Redemption, and Awakening, I guess. Do you have a favorite order? Let's start with if you want to go bottom to top or top to bottom, just let me know.
I would say I'm having trouble placing them in order because, like I said, I'm a little bit murky on all of the details, but I can say like what my favorites were.
Yeah.
And we would assume that the rest would fall underneath them.
No problem.
My absolute favorite volume is the very first volume, season 1. And I know like this is so like cliche because everyone says this, but like season 1 was the season that made me fall in love with Heroes. And I would have to say that I was also very on board with Generations. So it kind of all gets into like the order that they aired is the order that I placed them in. And I know that sounds bad because it's like, well, everyone got worse than the last one, but I really enjoyed. So the very first volume was my favorite, still is. Generations I liked because they played with the family aspects of Powers,
which they never really gave up on.
Yeah, they never. After that, it was like, well, this is where we're staying. But we learned so much about how powers work in the Heroes universe through that volume, and I like that very much. I would have to say perhaps Fugitives after that, then Villains. Am I going in order? Or am I getting? Did I just switch two of them?
No, you switched two of them up.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was attempting to do. Yeah, that might be the order for me.
Ooh, not even Awakening in there somewhere. Ooh, scandalous.
Again, well, for me. It's sort of like it's tough to put me on the spot because I don't. It's like I barely vaguely remember what happens in some of the.
That's all right.
I know all the tentpole moments, but like the overall thing, it's like not only do I remember what happened, but I don't remember how strongly I felt about.
You remember the tentpole moments, but you forget to talk about the circus episode, the circus one.
I was not a big fan of the circus stuff. That could be at the very bottom for me. I think if we're gonna. I mean, and it's sad because that's where we left off on Heroes. That was the last volume we got before the show was not renewed, aka canceled. And like I just I wasn't feeling the circus stuff. I liked what they were trying to do. I liked all the questions around it, like is it real, is it just fake, is it but I felt like it was confusing in a way that made people angry.
Yeah.
And I didn't like what that was doing to some people. People were, for the first time, just flat out rejecting some of the stuff that was happening on the show. And that I was like, well, I don't agree with you, but I also can't say you're wrong about some of this stuff. So I would say the Samuel stuff and all of that, the circus stuff, I remember not really feeling. What about you? What is your ideal order of?
I think I would go probably Fugitives first because I just like that it's so short and self-contained, and I think we get our characters pretty much at their best. I think especially if you're dealing with Peter Petrelli being at the front, he was the first season he's all well and good. I just couldn't take the emo-ness of it, and whereas in Fugitives he's kind of a leader and he does what he needs to do. It's a really good progression for him, but I think he's at his best in that one. I might go with the Genesis next, and then maybe Reborn. Like I think Reborn kind of has to go somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I actually quite like the idea of redemption, which was the circus one. Whether or not I would place it that high is another thing. I think the last three, definitely I'd put Villains at the bottom because I just think it was a bit too adding extra things on for the sake of it. And like Arthur Petrelli as a bad guy just felt like, as much as I love the actor, he just felt like he was phoning it in, and it kind of ruined it for me, I think. And
oh, really?
Yeah.
I liked having Arthur Petrelli on the show, and the actor
Forster.
Yeah, Robert Forster. He just to me seemed like just the right person to play that character, and so I really enjoyed Arthur Petrelli on the show. I didn't like how things wound up. I like the ending of that volume was, but the journey through it I enjoyed, and I guess that's why I put it so high on my list. But
how does it feel in this climate of how much people quote unquote loved Heroes Reborn to be a Heroes fan?
And so when with quotes you're saying sarcastically?
Yes, definitely.
Or is it, in a lot of ways it's exactly like the way we left off of the old show. And it was like the end of season 4, and people were very excited about that episode, of the final episode where Claire jumps off the thing, because it's like it opens up this door to so much more, which is eventually what Heroes Reborn ended up being. But there was so much at that point. There was like the lull of season 3 or so, and beginning of season 4, that fans, that, like I said, that some people sort of actively started disliking the show, and it was hard for us because when we're doing a podcast about it, and we are generally on board with everything that's happening because we have been, and we have to watch this. It's kind of a job at that point. Like, we've been doing this for 4 years, and however long they decide to do it, like, we're still going to make this podcast. I'm committed to this. And no one wants to listen to a podcast where 2 or 3 people just completely take apart and nitpick about everything that happens. Like, if we're not fans of the show first, then any complaints that we have fall sort of just people just don't want to hear it.
It sounds like bitching as opposed to
yeah, and I don't like listening to podcasts where it's just constantly stuff that they didn't like. So, and if I wanted to listen, I don't know why I would subject myself to that. But the thing is we were pretty huge fans of the show, and at the same time, like we were like, okay, we understand why they did this thing or that thing, and we understand why some fans
Heroes apologists
dislike this. Yeah, well, it's like I would say that a lot of people called us heroes apologists. Like, you'll just say everything nice about the show because blah, blah, blah. But like, no, it came from a place of like wanting to try to be positive so as to not alienate the folks that also, because we were certain that 90% of the people listening to us wanted to hear just our thoughts and not our like negative reactions to stuff. And so we tried to stay on that spectrum of like, well, you know, Samuel did this thing and it's ridiculous, but here's why it works. And I guess like we tried not to dip too much into the negative because we knew that would be that would turn a lot of people off. And we didn't want, like, honestly, I wouldn't want to listen to a show that does that. So as time went on, it's sort of like find the positive wherever you can and point it out. And then stuff that you don't like we don't want to hide it. We don't want to be like ignore it completely. And we've tried to be a little bit more open about our feelings for Reborn, which haven't been completely like we've had a lot of negative reactions to stuff, especially as it involves older characters. You know, like we feel very strongly about Noah and the Haitian and characters that we've been with for 10 years. We've known about for 10 years. And to have certain things happen on Reborn that we disagreed with that was infuriating to some of us. And so we pointed it out. I don't think we tried to sugarcoat much. You know, luckily I think a lot of people were kind of on the same page about that because we were coming from a place of being fans of the show and not trying to be like super fans or fanboys. I guess fanboy was the term 10 years ago that people would, does that still get used? I'm sure it still gets used, but, so that's the thing. And I felt like by the end of Heroes Reborn, we were right back where we started with a whole group of people that really were digging what was going on. And these were our loyal audience members and our podcast listeners and people that follow us on Twitter. And then there were a group of folks that were watching the kind of hate watching the show because they didn't like it or that they thought that it was stupid or maybe they liked it at one point and then something that happened changed their mind.
Funny thing about hate watching is you're watching the show and you're giving them views. So
you're contributing to their
exactly.
earnings either way. But which, you know, I'm sure they don't mind. But then it's like we can't cater our opinions to one group or the other too much. Like we definitely want to cater our opinions to the people that are graciously giving us their time every week. And the folks that are going to tune in just to see what the Heroes Apologists said about the show, just to fuel their hate and anger. Like, you know, we're not necessarily talking to them, though. We hope that if they were going to listen to us, that they would agree with some of the things that we said and also be like, well, man, they didn't even like this thing that I didn't like. and then be like, well, maybe they're not all, you know, Heroes Apologists after all. But I felt like by the end of Heroes Reborn, we were right. We were kind of back in that same place, which is not what I wanted. I really wanted Heroes Reborn to be like a return to form, which is also a loaded phrase for some people. But I wanted it to be sort of like, well, so one group is hate watching the show. Let's let them watch this and then have their feelings proven wrong. And have like Tim Crean kind of come back and be like, well, you said all this mean stuff about the first show. Well, here's this thing. And it's like the next big, huge thing. And I feel like that was heaping a lot of expectation on the show. And of course, you know, expectations are never a good thing. And that's something that we, I guess, struggled with now at the end of this is like, wow, it could have been this, it could have been that, but this is what it was. And it feels a lot like where we were 5 or 6 years ago.
Just a last quick question. How do you feel about the end? Like not specifically what happened at the end, but how do you feel about the tack on at the end? Whereas I think in season 4, you had this big world that you could kind of go into. Whereas, you've got Claire jumping off the Ferris wheel and you can go anywhere from there. You can go to like where they went in Heroes Reborn. You can go to people loving them. You can go to schools of like an X-Men style school or whatnot. Whereas this ending seems very
Heroes First Class.
Whereas this ending seems very, oh, we're just going to find out about the father in the next season. How do you feel about the kind of narrowing of the scope of where they can go?
I don't want to end on a negative thought.
Yes, okay.
but the biggest question we had from the moment we found out Claire had kids was, who's the father? They chose not to answer that question. And then at the very end of this mini-series event, they tacked on one scene that says, we will find out this question, the answer to this question, provided we get more content from Heroes. Which it seems as if, as far as on network television, it seems as if we are not going to get that, although Tim Kring and the higher ups at NBC have walked back those statements a bit. I have such conflicting opinions about it, because I wish that it would have. I wish that it would have ended with Quentin's monologue.
Definitely, yeah.
Because it was such a strong way to end it. Like, if you had ended with this scene, everyone would be like, you know what, that whole 13 episode thing we just watched, that was all right, because
it gave us closure.
Yeah, it was such a good way to close it out. And I'm absolutely sure that's the way it was probably supposed to end. And so adding on this thing of like, we'll find out who the father is next time on Heroes
in 3-5 years
was, and however many years it takes to greenlight another one of these. I did not, my initial reaction to that was not a positive one. And it was not a strong enough thing, even though it was like the one question left unanswered. I feel like my opinion, and I hope that you share a different opinion. I hope that we can cover the whole range of this, but I think that I would have been happy if it ended with Quentin's speech, and that if we were to get new seasons of this, that it would pick up somewhere interesting, but we didn't necessarily need that tease.
Here's how Lilith sells it to me, because I'm of the same vein as you, but she sells it in the fact that, well, we did get little teases of where we could go, because you have Team Elvenga Truther just working out of the Batcave, so to speak. So you could go to the next season onto them. You've got Melina at school at Odessa. You can go onto that. You've got Tommy working, like living and working with Emily. You get all these, and you've got Quentin in jail. You've got all these like little aspects you could go into and not worry about it just being about the father. But you kind of just, that's it. So that's how she kind of explains it to me. So it's not just the father. There's other places they can go. Let's try and end on a bit more of a positive note. If there was a season 2, who from Reborn and Original Heroes Prime would you like to see in it?
Oh, could I pick anybody?
Yeah.
So I would say, again, and this is because I just really thought he was a strong character, Quentin has to be in the show going forward. I want him to bring Noah back to life and have him on the show. Just kidding. I feel like the closure we got with Noah was appropriate. I don't like that he's gone, but if the show is going to move forward, maybe bring in a new character that's as strong as Noah, or that brings us
someone that can kind of complement Quentin to kind of be they could both together be the kind of HRG, where you've got like the one kind of got the one who's kind of the smarts and one who's kind of the muscle. So yeah.
Well, like that was the genius move of Heroes Reborn, was bringing back Noah and rooting the new show in this character that everyone unilaterally liked.
And also, I think not having him in the final 3 episodes kind of built you up to what was going to happen.
I feel like my other 2 co-hosts of the 10th Wonder would disagree with you, but I would. You felt his absence in those last 3 episodes in a meaningful way, and then when they brought him back, it was sort of like, oh, thank God he's back.
Oh no!
and then he dies. But it did add a lot of gravity to what happened. It's if you were paying attention, like this is the two kids' grandfather, you know, and this is and he gives his life to save the world
because he couldn't save his daughter.
Exactly. And so again, it was another like redeeming thing. And the show, like Tim Kring loves redemption.
He loves season 4, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like that theme of righting a wrong and getting forgiveness and atonement and stuff. Like you could see that in Luke's storyline from the second that Luke started having second thoughts about killing Evos. Like I knew that Luke was destined to become our person that sacrifices himself for a greater good to atone for the things that he's done. And, you know, sure enough, that ends up to be what happens. But in a lot of ways, that happens to nearly every character. So it's that theme of redemption that kind of has always flown through or gone through the show.
Anyway, who else would you have in there?
Who else would I have? So anybody I could pick. That's a main character, right? Because there's been a lot of supporting characters, and I would, you know, it'd be weird to bring back a random supporting character, like, oh look, Claude's back. Christopher
If you
Eccleston.
wanted him to come back,
I would want him to come back. I liked his character. I don't know. I would say Joe would want me to say Milo or Peter.
I think it makes sense to bring him back, especially if the father's coming for them and no one can protect them.
Exactly. It's like I would love to see Peter back on the show. I'm not sure if it needs to be him, and I'm not sure he would ever agree to doing it, judging by some of the things in the press. But I would love to see the character of Peter back on the show in a meaningful way. And oh man, I feel like I'm like navigating a minefield here because I really liked the character of Sylar until I didn't like the character of Sylar, you know. So when I remember the character of Sylar, I'm remembering what I liked. The show needed someone who was genuinely like just insane and evil. And I feel like Sylar was that person. I didn't believe that Erica was that evil. Joanne, she was, again, not one of my favorite characters. But Joanne seemed broken because of what happened to her son. And that brokenness led her to do things. But like at the very core of it, she's just like, she's a grieving mother who's taking it out on specials and stuff like that. So like when you get to that point, it's like, well, she's not, well, yeah, she's evil, but it's hard to be like, she is thoroughly, absolutely corrupt evil. Like you felt like there might be a chance that she could come around. So that would be why I would like Sylar back on the show, but like early Sylar. Okay. Like crazy Sylar.
He's gone off the path of redemption and just gone back to his old ways.
Yeah, something like that. Who else? I want to name at least one more person because I feel like those two are very like knee jerk, other than Quentin. But I would like to see Tommy continue. Yeah. Nathan continue on the show. He was not one of my favorite to start with, but by the end of it, like it felt like I was watching Peter on the show. It felt like he got what was going on, the gravity of what was going on. I believed it. His relationship with his mother was so good, and he's an empath. Come on. Like it's an interesting, like that power is one of the most interesting creations of heroes.
And that's how they can depower him as well, because obviously he's the master of time and space, and they can never really keep that around, can they? They'd have to turn him into an 8-year-old so that he couldn't go back and do everything again. So yeah, they'd have to give him a different power, I think, in order to bring him back. But that's something that I wouldn't mind seeing, like him just playing about with powers.
Oh yeah,
and then going back into Evernow and learning how to use them at their utmost potential.
Well, we only ever got to see him use the time travel ability, right? We never got to see him take any other ability, even though we're fairly sure that his power works a lot like Peter.
I'm sure it's consciously he has to take it now, whereas when he was younger, it was like subconsciously that he took.
Right, we talked about that for sure, because it was like there were a couple of times where someone with powers touched him, and he there was Otamo and I think Molly touched him too, or he touched Molly to send her away. So yeah, we were like, why does he still have time travel if he touched it? You know, and it was supposed to be this unconscious thing. But again, you know, I guess as you wield your power, it manifests. It's a little less unconscious. It's not passive as it is like an active thing. So That would be my choices. I would say Peter, Quentin, Siler, and Tommy. I would like to have on the show at some point if we're just picking like people. But again, my original instinct when I heard the show was coming back was like, let's just nuke this whole thing and just start fresh with completely new characters, because everyone loved the first season because these were new characters and we were finding out so much about people that we were just introduced to, and we found out that moment of discovery of powers was one of the strongest moments of the entire
and I think that's what made Heroes Reborn different. You kind of didn't have those origin stories, because you kind of did, but it wasn't as prevalent. But I think that's also the context of the world that they're in. Like, a lot more people know about it, so it's not like people hiding it.
That's what worked so well in the first season of Heroes, is like we're following these characters and there's interesting stuff happening, and then all of a sudden, whoa, what just happened? Like this table just flew across the room, and like, or the clock ticked backwards. What the heck? And that ended up that I feel like those were the scenes that made you fall in love with the characters and made you like really get invested. And that I feel like we didn't get a lot of that this time, because it was sort of like this afterthought of like, well, we've done that, let's do this. And I would love there to be like an Etch-a-Sketch, like, all right, new set of characters, different world. Let's reboot, like American Horror Story, like just completely blow up everything and do vignettes of something completely different every time. But I'm sure there's people out there that don't want that.
And on that note of blowing up and starting everything again, I'd like to thank you for your time to coming on.
Well, thank you. This is great. I know that Joe and Derek couldn't make it, but let's keep this going. If
once you guys get your podcast out, then I think we can talk a bit more about it, because obviously there's some stuff you kind of don't want to not give away, but talk about just yet until you brought it out on your own show. So yeah.
For sure, because I'm sure I don't want to speak for them, because I know that they never agree with what I'm saying. So it was definitely going to be interesting when we eventually record our thoughts on the finale and stuff like that, and definitely we'll see if we can get them to come back and talk about kind of their reactions as well. But yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for asking me.
No problem. If you guys want to check out their podcast, we'll leave it in the show notes. It's pretty simple. Just go to @HeroesPodcast, right?
Yeah, that's our Twitter account, @HeroesPodcast, and you can, and I think, just heroespodcast.com is our website, and you can find all the ways to subscribe. And I think we're fairly findable on iTunes too, if you just Heroes Podcast.
No problem. So, thank you for taking time out. Hope you all enjoyed the interview. Hope you found it entertaining and informative. Until next time, download the podcast, save the world.